Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Hi, this is Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, CEO, founder, Chief Medical Officer at Gladden Longevity. I'm looking forward to sharing my expertise with you today on optimizing brain health. And we're going to go deep on this topic. Stay tuned until the end, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to reach out to us and participate in an ongoing trial that we're involved with using a molecule that seems to be actually reversing dementia for people. I think you're going to find this extremely interesting.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius podcast. My guest today is Dr. Jeffrey Gladden. He's a board-certified interventional cardiologist and the founder of Gladden Longevity. We're going to talk about his personal health journey, about thyroid health, and how to achieve longevity. So welcome, Jeff. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Good to be here.
Hey, tell me a bit about your background. What led you to be interested in health? As you mentioned, a personal journey. What happened to you?
Yeah, so I practiced interventional cardiology in Dallas for 25 years, and I ended up doing a lot of things in that space that I really loved. I built my own heart group. I had 10 offices and 12 docs, and we built, co-founded a heart hospital in Dallas as well that's become nationally recognized. And I was involved with medical device companies and kind of always on the cutting edge of interventional cardiology work. But in my 50s, I got sick. I was putting on weight. I was exhausted all the time. I was losing strength. When I would be in stressful situations, I would find myself sort of going over a cliff of depression. And not just the kind of depression where you go for a walk or talk to a friend and be, feel fine again. It was just like really deep. And I was also developing brain fog, which was concerning because my dad ended up dying with dementia. And so I went in and got tested by one of my colleagues, obviously concerned with what was going on. And what I was told was, everything checks out for your age. You're just getting older. Why don't you take an antidepressant? And, it was a very existential moment for me, right? I mean, I'm used to my kids not being able to keep up with me and everything else. Now it's like, it's just all going to be downhill from here, professionally, relationally as a parent. And so I basically rejected the recommendation, and I threw myself into the functional integrative age management medicine space. And 2.5 years later, I'd cracked the code on basically everything that was going on. So, I had subclinical hypothyroidism that wasn't detected with blood work. Everything was in quote unquote normal ranges, but I didn't have enough thyroid activity at the cellular level, which was only picked up with, for me, was reflex testing, but also with resting metabolic rates. And then genetically, I don't convert inactive to active thyroid in my brain efficiently. So I was handicapped there as well. And then my testosterone levels were down, DHEA was down. And so I got hormone replacement therapy going. And then the anxiety, stress leading to anxiety, depression, and brain fog are related to the fact that genetically I don't make certain neurotransmitters very efficiently. So once I got on the right combination of supplements to actually help me do that and avoided certain things that would cause brain fog, then, all of a sudden I felt great again, right? I mean, I felt like really great again. And I realized at that moment that, everything I'd been doing in cardiology was sick care. And I was so drawn to want to help people optimize health. And that's really how it started. So, I started asking a different question. I started asking, geez, I wonder how good I can be, how fit, how strong, how mentally sharp, how many years and decades can we carry it forward? So that was the nidus for me, basically base jumping out of cardiology, which is where I knew how to make a living, into what's become Gladden Longevity, where I had no idea how to make that work exactly, but I just knew I was called to do it and had no real choice to do it, right, except to do it, if you will. So
how did you know that about your metabolic pathways and all this? What, if you can, just go a little bit into your journey of how you figured out, what was going on with you?
Yeah, well, it was genetic testing, right? So when you do your DNA test, let's say you use a company like Intellex. I have no relationship to this company, no financial interest in them, but this company, Intellex DNA, really excels at reporting, right? So it's not about sequencing anymore, it's reporting. And inside their genetic reports is where I figured out about my DIO2 gene not being able to convert inactive to active thyroid, and also where I found out about my methylation issues and my own risk for dementia, even though I don't carry the Alzheimer's genes, right? So, it's impossible to actually solve problems if you don't really know the cards you're holding. And so getting high quality genetics testing done, not, 23andMe and Ancestry and things like that, but things that can actually give you really actionable advice becomes kind of a cornerstone. And then the other thing is understanding that blood tests are also limited. So the way I explain medical testing to people is that, each test is basically a lens, right? So you're looking at, an organ system or a process through a particular lens. And in humans, one lens is good enough. So a lot of people will say, well, did my stress test and my heart is fine. Or I did my Clearly CTA and my heart is fine. Or I did, my Cleveland or my Boston or whatever it was, blood tests, and, my heart is fine. What's really important to understand, however, is that medical testing is more like the eye of a housefly, right? So, we have one lens. A housefly has many lenses. It's a compound eye. And in order to actually get a picture in medicine, you have to look at it through multiple lenses. You have to understand the anatomy, the physiology, the genetics. And if you're not looking at it through all those different lenses, then you really don't know what's going on. And it's very easy to be misled, if you will. So there are a lot of people that are told it's all in their head, when in actual fact, what's really happened is they just haven't had the proper testing done. So,
well, all right. I mean, it sounds like there's more than one test. So what are some of the symptoms that should cause someone to say, all right, let me look into this, and not just going with the expectation of I'll just pop a pill and I'll be fine? But they need multiple types of intervention.
Yeah. I think what triggers it for most people is when they don't feel like they want to, don't look like they want to, or can't do what they want to, right? Those are typically that and pain, right? So if someone's in pain, and that could be any kind of pain, anything from emotional pain to, physical pain in the hip, to pain in their stomach or their abdomen, bloating, gas. If there's any symptom going on, rash, if there's any symptom going on you're not happy with, then that's an indication really to try to understand, why is this happening? Not simply find, what salve can I put on it? What probiotic can I take? What joint supplement can I take to try to help my hip? That's like really putting a Band-Aid on the situation. And what I found, and what I discovered in interventional cardiology, is that, when you actually understand things with greater precision, you can always get a better outcome for the individual you're working with, right? So in our world, in the interventional world, we did all kinds of additional visualization techniques and things like that before we would fix an artery, so that we really knew what we were doing, or at least that we knew as well as we could what we were doing, not just rely on the typical things that other interventional cardiologists were doing at the time. And so the same is true now. If you really want to solve a problem, you have to understand not only that it's there, but how did it get there? Why is it there, right? And once you understand that, then you can actually start to make some real progress. So I think that's the mindset you have to have.
Oh, yeah, that's the mindset you have to have. But again, what symptoms would lead someone to think, all right, it's not going to be a simple solution versus...
Well, Richard, let me ask you a question. What is something that's bothering you?
I don't know, like my sleep is not the greatest. My lung function is kind of off.
All right. So there you go. So in your case, it would be sleep and lung function. So then the question is, well, why am I not sleeping? Right. It's just based on kind of what you're feeling. Now, interestingly enough, if you're really interested in longevity, then, you've got to go even deeper than that, right? You've got to really understand that longevity is an exponential, or aging is an exponential process, right? And what I mean by that is that we experience aging much faster, in our 60s and 70s and 80s than we did in our 20s, 30s, 40s. So aging accelerates over time, and we're kind of at a disadvantage because we think it's linear. We perceive it as linear, right? Every year it's another birthday. I don't feel that much different. So it's kind of linear. And even though we see all around us that other people are aging faster, and as they age, chronologically, we have a hard time relating to it, right? Like if I was going to ask the audience or yourself, what are you going to be like 20 years, right? What are you going to be like? Just feel into that for a minute. It's almost impossible to think we're going to be any different than we are.
Well, I'm about to turn 50, so that's enough of the highlights. There you go. Sounds old. That's fine. And I know some people would say, "Oh, please." Sounds
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things about that statement that are interesting. So the first one is that you have to understand that you're in an exponential game. And I find that most strategies in the longevity space are linear strategies, right? I'm going to eat better, I'm going to sleep better, I'm getting my hormones tested, I'm going to, get a Fitbit, learn how to manage stress and, get more exercise and get a grounding mat and, jump in the sauna 4 days a week, right? So, and intermittent fast. So, I mean, those are all wonderful things, but the problem is they're basically a linear response to an exponential problem. In other words, everybody that ever did that, they all get old and die. Right. So clearly it's not enough. So then the real question is, how do you develop an exponential response to an exponential problem? And that's really what I write about in the book, 100 is the New 30, really developing that exponential response strategy, if you will, to the exponential problem. One of the first...
What does that mean, an exponential response? And the exponential problem meaning that each year that goes by after, a certain age, that it's going to be, exponentially harder in order to fix things? Or what do you mean?
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Well, you're exponentially aging faster.
Okay.
Right. So if you decline by, look at it this way, resilience is cut in half every 8 years. Right. So if you think about that, all right, so you're about to turn 50. So let's call you 50. Well, at 58, you'll have half the resilience you do it right now. Right. At 66.
At 58, you're saying.
Yeah. At 66, it'll be half again. Right. At 74, half again. At 82, half again. At 90, half again. So you can see that the decline is that's an exponential curve. If you put that on a graph, that's an exponential decline. And that's what happened. And yet we don't relate to that. And many people, even physicians, don't understand that that's actually what's happening, but that is what's happening. And so the way we deconstruct that is to say, okay, it's an exponential response. There's a lot of data that shows this, right? And then, so what's an exponential strategy look like, right? Well, for us, it involves 5 different circles, if you will, 5 different areas that you need to think about. The first one is the life energy circle, which is really the psycho-spiritual space. And that gets into lots of really interesting things about the meaning of life and why you're here and traumas that we've, suffered in the past and how we live in reaction to those and why are we anxious and why do we fear something and do we have enough self-love and things like this, right? So the life energy circle is really critical because when the life energy circle is optimized, your biology is under a lot less pressure, a lot less stress, and that really aids in the entire process. And then the second circle has to do with longevity itself, which is looking at the actual biological processes that are actually driving aging, right? So like shortening telomeres and mitochondrial function that doesn't work as well, and the gut biome that's thrown off, and an immune system that's no longer able to recognize foreign invaders and cancer cells and kill them, the buildup of senescent cells in the body, which accelerates inflammation, on and on. So there's these processes that are actually the root cause of what you're experiencing. And so having a strategy to both test and address those becomes important. And then the third circle is health, right? Which is the circle most of us relate to, like, how's my heart? Do I have diabetes? How's my brain? What's my bone density? Things like that, all also super important. And then there's performance. When I'm 100, I want to be fast, agile, strong, quick, balanced with great cardiovascular capacity, reserve, and flexibility. So if I'm going to do that at 100, then I need to do that today, right? And so how do I train to do that, right? Well, it's different. When you're 18, you lift some weights and go for a run. Every decade of your life, you have to train differently. And you have to understand that what you're really training is your nervous system, right? To be able to move through space, to be fast and agile and strong and quick. It's really down to the nervous system. And then the fifth circle is really the environment environments we reside in, architecting each of those home, work, business travel, vacation travel to support the mission so that it's easy as possible to actually keep doing what it is you want to be doing. So then there's testing that comes out of this, right? So we can test across all these circles and understand where somebody is. We can know their genetics and know the cards they're holding. If they don't know the cards they're holding, how are they going to win an exponential game? If they don't know where they are in the game, how are they going to win an exponential game? So you have to test across these circles to understand. And then from there, you can develop a strategy, right? And now you can actually really move the needle and, your sleep can get solved, your lung function can be improved. All those things can happen, but it happens with deep understanding, not with, oh, I have that, I'll take an inhaler, right? Or I'll take a sleeping pill, right?
How are you supposed to get deep understanding? By going to most functional medicine at best, and then you have to do a lot of research on your own too.
Yeah. So to your point, traditional medicine is really handcuffed to the payer system, right? So insurance companies really control what's available and not available. If they're not paying for it, then nobody's talking about it or doing it, right? So in that sense, we don't have a healthcare system. We really have a sick care system. So if you break a leg and you need an orthopedist, then by all means, or you're having a heart attack, by all means, right? Those are wonderful services that can be provided. But when you're trying to optimize health, if that's the question you're asking, then you can't go to a sick care practitioner to optimize your health. So it's like taking your car to a body shop. It's great when you had an accident, but they're not going to turn it into a Ferrari, right?
What do you do for patients that you see? Like, what do you take them through in order to assess what's going on with them?
We take them through the 5 circles I just discussed, and there are many points around those circles, and we test across those points. And from there, we can actually build really kind of a virtual avatar of that individual, if you will, right? And since we're looking at things through multiple lenses, we actually start to get a clear picture of what is their cardiovascular status, what is their brain health like. They might have had a concussion when they were 6 years old or 14 years old. Is that still a residual impact on them, right? And so when you look at everything in a thorough fashion and you realize that the body is kind of like a rainforest, right? It's a complex ecosystem. And in order to optimize a complex ecosystem, you have to understand that ecosystem and then nurture it in a way that it can stay healthy, right? So that's kind of how we do it. That's the thought process.
So what are some examples, without naming names, of people that you worked with that, they just weren't getting help for a long time and you were able to help figure out what's going on?
Yeah, we just had a woman in who came to us with intractable psoriasis on her hands and feet, could hardly work. She's in her late 30s. She'd seen her dermatologist for a number of years. They kept giving her different creams to try and things like that, right? So she's using lots of steroid creams. Meanwhile, she's gaining weight. Nobody seemed to pay too much attention to that. She was drinking alcohol on a pretty regular basis. Not an alcoholic, but drinking on a pretty regular basis. Anyway, could hardly work. So we brought her down here. We basically deconstructed the situation, right? So when you have autoimmune disorders, one of the big drivers of that would be a gut that's not working properly, right? So the microbiome is off and the gut is leaky and there's bacterial overgrowth and yeast overgrowth, all of which she had in the gut. So we went to work cleaning up her gut. And then we know that with autoimmune diseases, they tend to carry a lot of antibodies in their bloodstream. So we did plasmapheresis for her to remove her plasma and remove those antibodies and replace it with saline and albumin. And then we know that there are signaling peptides that will actually help heal her skin. And then she had insulin resistance. Even though she wasn't diabetic, she had pretty severe insulin resistance. And so we set her up with a continuous glucose monitor and put her on the right supplements and the right diet. And, we just talked with her, she came in January, she's back working, she's working out, she's dancing with her partner again, she's living life, doing everything she wants to do. Her hands healed up, right? And it's not because we found the right salve. It's not because we told her to take the right supplement. It's because we deconstructed the situation to understand why is this happening? And then you can actually create the solution. So
She became savvy enough to find you.
Well, her dad's a client of ours. And so he said, hey, why don't you go talk to them? So I talked today with a 35-year-old triathlete, right, who basically is suffering from injuries. And she was competing at a kind of a international level, right? And so very disappointing for her to be suffering with these injuries and she can't compete. And she's got issues going on with tendonitis. And she also has issues going on with her hamstrings being tight and an injury there. And she's had lots of different therapies, right? PRP and pulse shockwave therapy and lots of things to try to heal this, right? To heal these things up. And she's not healing, right? So we talked to her about, okay, well, let's understand why this this is happening in the first place, right? So that means doing your genetics, right? Different people have different genetics to be able to handle the oxidative stress that comes from these protracted races, right? And different people can actually handle inflammation or not handle it based on their genetics. And then athletes that work out all the time, they also mess up their guts pretty dramatically. And it turns out, as I asked her about that, she said, yeah, I'm bloating 90% of the time. It's like, okay.
Why do athletes affect their guts negatively? What do they do?
Because of the stress. Athletes, they age themselves more rapidly. Like elite athletes are aging up at a more rapid pace, right? Because of the added stress on the system. People that sit on the couch are aging more rapidly too, right? So exercise, there's a sweet spot for exercise. Too much is bad, too little is bad. So these people are pushing themselves, right? And so they tear up their guts from all the stress, and their diets aren't always the best, even though they're, managing macros and things like that. A lot of them are nutritionally deficient because they're burning through nutritional elements so quickly that they have a hard time actually repleting those. And so, we built out a program for her to deconstruct her situation first. Let's look at your genetics. Let's look at your nutrient status. Let's look at your hormone status for that matter. Athletes like that will also have lower testosterone and lower growth hormone and things like that, right? We think of the athletes as being like the picture of health, but in actual fact, they're really aging themselves much more quickly. And she's never going to be able to heal if she doesn't have adequate levels of testosterone and estrogen and growth hormone in her system, right? So it's like, let's deconstruct this and understand where you're at. And then, yes, we have all the regenerative technologies here, right, to be able to fix things. But the other thing was, what's your body symmetry like, right? Are you working with somebody to make sure you're aligned properly? And she said, yeah, I just finally found a physical therapist that's actually really working on that. It's really starting to make a difference. It's like, great, that's exactly what you need. Because whenever you have an injury, what happens is your nervous system starts to compensate for that. And even when you fix the injury, you have to retrain the nervous system. Also, you have to rehab the nervous system to allow the body to move fluidly again, right? And most people miss that piece of it. They think it's all about the muscle or the joint or the knee, but it's not. The nervous system is a big controller of this. So when you get that right, then all of a sudden somebody can back and they can walk with an even gait. And I asked her about her gait. She said, yeah, my gait's off. Okay, so this is a big reason. If we fix her, she's just going to hurt herself again. So you have to deconstruct things and understand things deeply enough so that you can actually really get durable solutions for people. And that's kind of how we think about it.
So who are some of the hardest people to help and why?
Well, the people that don't care, they're impossible to help, right?
Why would they come to you if they don't care?
No, if you're asking me in general, we have people that show up and say, fix me, but they don't really care to engage, right?
They're not willing to do any work. They just say, fix me, I'm busy with it.
Yeah, I'll write you a check and you fix me. We're coaches. We're not, we can't hold the fork. We can't do the push-up. We can't take the supplements. We can't, do the things that we recommend, if you will. And there are many, so the hardest people to help are the people that don't really want to participate in, what's happening. So apart from that, we can help virtually everybody. If somebody comes to us and they're motivated to make changes and understand what's happening and adapt to that, right? Which is key in life. How do you adapt? It's not about how do you stay the same. It's how do you adapt? And so if they're willing to do that, then we can make really good progress. So
there must be some people that have come to you though, that was like, you just couldn't figure it out. I don't know, maybe someone had glyphosate poisoning or heavy metals or something unusual. Is there any conditions that you've seen that they really take a long time to figure out for some reason?
I think people struggle with things like Lyme and mold and stuff like that. We have all that figured out now. We know how to diagnose that, treat that, reverse that, long haul symptoms, we know how to treat that and fix that. When some of those things first show up, you kind of struggle a bit to figure out, what is actually happening and how do you actually get to the root cause. But, the mindset that we have of not taking action until we understand what it is we're doing and why we're doing it helps us in those situations, even when it's something we haven't seen before, right? So yes, there are tougher cases in that sense for sure. Yeah.
What's okay. So all right. So beyond what age would you say it's not too late, but you can only really, I don't know, just I guess put Band-Aids over what's going on. You can't really help someone too much. Or is there no age at which you can't really help somebody?
Well, I think one of the biggest things for longevity has to do with the person's mindset, right? So in my case, you mentioned your chronological age. I think chronological age is actually a useless number. it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't serve any purpose when you think about health. So, I was born in 1954, right? In February of 1954, and I wake up 27 every day. And the reason I wake up 27 is because that's actually a useful age. Like, I reference everything about me to 27. And if I don't feel 27, I never say, oh yeah, but you're good for your age. You can do this, you can do all that. You can mountain bike and snowboard. You can do all these things, run. You can do anything you want, right? I never reference that as like, oh, I'm doing great. It's like, no, I'm 27. And now I'm actually pushing back towards 18 on some of the things I'm doing with some of the mountain bike rides I'm having and stuff like that. It's like, I think I could actually get back to 18 physically. So that's when I was playing soccer in college. So I think the point is it makes a big difference what you believe, right? So if you believe you're 50 and you believe you're middle-aged and you believe that it's all downhill from here, well, that's exactly what's going to happen. But if you believe something else and you start asking different questions, right? So we ask different questions. The question I mentioned is how good can we be? But how do we make 100 the new 30? How do we live young for a lifetime? How do we live well past 120? And how do we actually develop a 300-year-old mind, right? With all the wisdom, insight, perspective that comes from personal growth and development in the psycho-spiritual space. Now you're really moving into a life that nobody's really been able to live before, because you end up at 100 with a 30-year-old body and a 300/3,000-year-old mind. It's a different universe, right? And that's kind of what we're going for.
Well, who do you know that, I don't know, the oldest person that's in really great health? Like what's some of their info looks like?
Well, we have people in their 80s that came to us in their early 80s and were really struggling. And now they're, out jogging, they're traveling, they're going to car shows, they're, playing golf, they're, doing all kinds of stuff. They're living their life, in a full manner, I would say. And they're in their, back half of their 80s, 87, that kind of thing. So those will be people that are, they're living life. But if they hadn't come to see us, they'd be in a wheelchair, right? So it's like Henry Ford said, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're probably right. Mindset is really what's so important. I think the other thing that I would say is that there's a really big misconception out there about, life itself. Like, we think we go through life to kind of find our answers, right? We think it's our task in life to find our answers, what we believe, what we think, how it works, how we're going to do this and that. And so, but I found that all progress really comes from questions, not from answers. And that all answers actually have a shelf life. And so in my practice, we have literally thousands of answers for people. And yet, intellectually, we're not married to any of them. We're only married to the questions, right? How good can we be? How do we make 100 the new 30? How do we live young for a lifetime? How do we live well beyond 120? How do we develop that 300-year-old mind? And that's what drives progress here every single day. And if you're an individual, I think it's really listening to this, I would encourage you that the biggest thing you could do to help yourself would be to claim the age you want to be for the rest of your life. So whatever it is, 18, 26, 28, 35, 42, it doesn't matter, but claim that age and then reference that. That will be massively impactful for you. And the other thing you can do is to figure out, what questions am I asking, right? Am I asking, how am I going to make it through the next 10 years of work and then retire and then go to a place where I can play golf and hang out with my friends and play bridge? Well, those are the answers that you'll get. But if you're asking, no, I want to be vital and active and start new businesses and do all kinds of things, for decades and decades to come. Well, the answers are there. They're really there. I mean, it's really here. This kind of science and action-based medicine is really here today. So those are the answers you'll get.
And that's amazing. What are some of the most common complaints you get from new patients?
Well, I think a lot of people come in, with energy issues, hormone issues, gut issues are common. Cancer is common also. People come to us with cancer. People come in with brain fog. Anxiety is important. It's an important complaint. Anxiety and depression, grief. People come to us, not primarily for that, but a lot of people carrying that as they come in, and we're very diligent about helping them with that as well. And so, I think cardiovascular issues are big. Bone density is another one that's people come for. So, and then, just general questions like, I'm really starting to lose my edge, right? I feel like I can't keep up. How do I turn that back? So, we have people that are racing Porsches now nationally in their 70s, and they thought they were going to quit in their 60s, right? And yet they're still on the podium. So, you could throw away chronological age. It's a useless thing. It's not about chronological age. It's just, reference the things I talked about, right? Develop a young body and a very wise, transcendent perspective for your mind. Yeah.
So where can you help people? Is it nationwide or only certain states?
We're located in Dallas. So, we have a podcast too, the Gladden Longevity podcast, and the book is out. 100 is the new 30. We have a supplement shop. And if people are interested to work with us, they can always go to the website, GladdenLongevity.com, and schedule a free consultative call. But to work with people in Texas, we have to see them in Texas, at least initially, to establish a physician-patient relationship. So people do fly in from all over to do that, right? I spoke with a woman from Texas this morning, a woman from North Carolina this morning. Yesterday, I spoke with a guy from Puerto Rico. So, people come in from all over to work with us because what we do, you can't get just any place, right? There aren't a lot of people that think like we do or go the extra mile the way that we do. And so, yeah, people do need to come here. We do have plans to expand. We're going to be doing something in Scottsdale. We're going to be doing something in the Bahamas and probably move forward from there as well. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, very good. And how can people get in contact with you? What's the best way?
Well, the best way would be to go to the website, GladdenLongevity.com. And as I said, they can reach out there, or if they'd like to schedule a free call, they can do that as well. So that's probably the easiest way to get to us.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the call. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard. Good talking with you.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.